The man with a quiet wallet. It was a cloudy morning when Keanu Reeves walked into a small local bank in Santa Monica. No red carpet, no entourage. Just a simple black hoodie, worn jeans, and his usual calm face. The security guard at the door barely glanced at him. The teller behind the counter didn't look up right away. To them, he was just another man with scruffy hair and tired eyes. Nobody knew this day would leave a scar on the building's history. Keanu waited in line like everyone else. He stood behind a young mother juggling her baby and a checkbook. He offered to hold the door for an old man with a cane. Nobody recognized him, and he didn't try to be noticed. When it was finally his turn, he stepped up to the glass window. The teller, a woman named Clara, was young, sharp, and full of opinions. She barely looked at him before saying, "Yes?" Keanu gave a gentle smile. "Hi, I'd like to withdraw $500 from my account, please." Clara sighed. "Cash?" He nodded. "Yes, cash." She looked him up and down, eyes scanning the faded hoodie and tired sneakers. "Sir, our ATM is right over there. You don't need to waste anyone's time here for that." He chuckled lightly. "I know, but I'd rather speak to a person today." Her tone sharpened. "You have ID?" "Of course." He handed over his driver's license. When she saw the name, Keanu Charles Reeves, her eyes flicked up with disbelief. Funny, real funny. "Got any proof this is actually you?" Keanu wasn't offended. He'd been mistaken for someone else plenty of times. "My signature matches. And my photo. If you'd like, you can call the manager." Clara didn't call anyone. Instead, she waved to the assistant manager behind her and whispered something with a grin. The assistant peered through the glass at Keanu, laughed and shook his head. "Look," Clara said, still smirking. "Even if you were Keanu Reeves, why would a millionaire need $500 from a tiny bank like this?" He smiled kindly. "Sometimes a man just wants to walk around with cash in his pocket. Reminds him of the old days." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. You don't look like a man with money. Let me guess. Actor trying to be funny? TikTok prank?" Keanu didn't say anything. He just waited patiently. After some back and forth and several more sarcastic comments from Clara, she finally processed the transaction and handed over the cash. "There you go. Try not to spend it all in one place, Mr. Reeves." He took the money, thanked her politely, and walked out without another word. Nobody noticed the elderly bank cleaner in the corner watching everything. Nobody cared about the quiet man leaving with a small envelope in hand. But the story was only beginning. 3 hours later, a sleek black car pulled up outside the bank. It was silent, electric, and unfamiliar. The driver stepped out and looked around. He wore a tailored suit, but there was something strange about his eyes, like he wasn't there to smile. He entered the bank without speaking, without asking. He didn't wait in line. He went straight to the manager's office. In less than 10 minutes, the bank manager was white as a ghost. Within the hour, the assistant manager was escorted out of the building. Before sunset, Clara had been called into a private room. She didn't come out for a long time. Meanwhile, Keanu had gone to visit a children's hospital nearby. He sat by a little boy's bed and read him a storybook. The boy didn't know who he was. He just liked the sound of his voice. When asked later why he went to that specific bank, Keanu only said, "I used to come here with my mom when we had nothing. I wanted to see if it still felt the same." But that wasn't the full story. The next morning, news spread like fire. The bank had received a sudden withdrawal request for $2 billion. Not from an account, not from a person, from a holding company, a company that Keanu Reeves quietly owned. And that bank, it was one of the few branches trusted with managing its backup treasury systems. They laughed at him for asking for $500. They weren't laughing now. But this wasn't about revenge. Keanu wasn't trying to punish anyone. He was about to teach them and the world something deeper. Something about how the richest souls don't always look rich, and how the loudest lessons are taught by the quietest people. The ripple no one expected. The next day, the air inside the bank felt different. Clara arrived for her shift, but something in the eyes of her co-workers told her they knew. The assistant manager's desk was empty. His nameplate had been taken down. Rumors whispered between desks. Some said he'd been suspended. Others said he was escorted out by security for laughing in front of the wrong man. Clara tried to act normal. She greeted people like usual, but her fingers trembled when she typed. When the bank manager called her into his office, her legs felt like stone. "Sit down, Clara," he said softly, no longer the confident man she knew. He looked like he hadn't slept. "We need to talk about yesterday." She nodded, forcing a small laugh. "About that guy pretending to be Keanu Reeves?" He didn't laugh. "Clara," he said, folding his hands together. "That was Keanu Reeves." She froze. He didn't come here for publicity. He didn't come here for attention. He came here as a man, a customer, and instead he was humiliated. Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to. I thought he was joking." "I believe you," he said, sighing. "But that doesn't change what happened." Then he slid a photo across the table. It showed Keanu, standing outside the children's hospital from the night before, surrounded by nurses and smiling kids. Behind him was a small banner. "Thank you, Keanu Reeves, for your love and your kindness." "Do you understand now?" the manager whispered. He was never trying to prove anything. Tears stung Clara's eyes. For the first time, she felt truly ashamed. Not because of punishment, but because she had looked a kind man in the eye and chose to be cruel. Across town, Keanu was sitting on a bench by the beach, sipping black coffee. The sun was rising, slowly, painting the sky in soft gold. He didn't look like a man worth billions. He looked like a man remembering something. An older man in a brown coat approached him. He walked with a limp and a cane, the same man Keanu had helped open the door for at the bank. "Sir," the old man said kindly, "I saw what they did to you yesterday. I just wanted to say thank you for your patience, for not raising your voice. Most people would have caused a scene." Keanu smiled. "I've learned that shouting makes people deaf. Kindness makes them listen." The old man chuckled. "You know, your mother used to come to that bank. I worked there 30 years ago. She'd bring you in with your tiny feet and quiet eyes. You never cried. You just look around watching everything." Keanu's smile faded into thought. "She hated banks," he whispered, "but she always made sure we had enough. She taught me that even if you don't have money, you can still have dignity." The old man placed a hand on his shoulder. She raised a good one. That afternoon, the story hit the news. Not because Keanu called the press. Someone at the hospital posted a photo of him reading stories to sick kids. It went viral within minutes. The caption read, "He came quietly, didn't even tell us his name. Just said he wanted to spend time with someone who needed a story today." Soon after, a staff member at the bank anonymously leaked security footage from the day before. It showed Clara rolling her eyes. It showed the assistant manager laughing. It showed Keanu standing patiently, never raising his voice, never even frowning. The internet reacted fast. Some were angry, others were inspired. But one comment stood out more than any. He asked for $500 and they mocked him. Now they know he could have bought the whole building and still walked out with change. Within hours, the bank's social media pages were flooded with comments. Some defended Clara, saying everyone makes mistakes, others demanded apologies. Some customers closed their accounts quietly. But Keanu, he didn't say a word. He was too busy visiting a struggling school nearby, handing out new books to kids whose library hadn't been updated in 10 years. Clara sat alone in the break room that night, holding a hot cup of tea that had already gone cold. She stared at her reflection in the window. "Why did I judge him?" she whispered. Her coworker, Sam, walked in and sat beside her. "Because we all do. Every day. And sometimes we need to be reminded. Not everyone who walks in looks like who they are." "I don't know if I'll keep my job," she said. Sam nodded. "Maybe. Maybe not. But what you do next matters more." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "You get a chance most people don't get," he said. You can still apologize. And not just to him, but to yourself. For being the person you didn't want to be. Later that night, in a quiet room, Clara wrote a letter by hand. Dear Mr. Reeves, I didn't see who you were, and worse, I didn't see what you were. Kind. I mocked a man who showed me patience, and I feel deep shame. Not because you're famous, but because you were decent and I wasn't. I'm sorry. I hope you forgive me. Clarish didn't post it online. She mailed it, the old-fashioned way. She didn't even know if he'd read it. But she hoped. Meanwhile, Keanu sat on a rooftop somewhere above Los Angeles, staring at the city lights. Beside him sat a small notebook filled with ideas for a charity he wanted to start. A bank for the poor, where people would never be judged by their clothes or faces but by their needs. He thought of the teller. He thought of his mom. He thought of how it all started with just a quiet request for $500. And he smiled. He had no plans to ruin anyone. He just wanted to build something better. The silence that shook the city. Early the next morning, the doors of the bank opened as usual. Customers came in, the lights flickered on, and computers hummed to life. But beneath the surface, the air felt heavy. Clara's desk sat untouched. The seat that once held the assistant manager was still empty, and the manager, a man usually confident and loud, now walked slowly, answering every call himself with a strained voice. A notice had been posted near the entrance. Due to internal review, limited staff will be available today. Thank you for your patience. Meanwhile, across the city, something much quieter was happening, but far more powerful. Keanu Reeves was walking into a rundown building in South Los Angeles. The walls were cracked, the roof sagged in places, and the sign outside had faded years ago. It was once a community center, now abandoned, used only by pigeons and dust. But he wasn't there to remember the past. He was there to change the future. He stepped over broken tiles, ran his fingers along old bricks, and smiled to himself. This was the place his mother once brought him when he was just a boy. Back then, she couldn't afford babysitters, so she'd leave him here with other kids while she worked double shifts. This building had given him shelter. Now, it was time to give back. He took out his phone and made a quiet call. It's time, he said. Buy it. I want everything rebuilt. I'll cover it all. In the next 3 days, headlines exploded, but not the kind that praised money or fame. Instead, every major network shared the same story. Keanu Reeves starts silent billion-dollar movement, aims to restore dignity, not reputation. The article told how Keanu, after facing humiliation at a local bank, didn't lash out or sue anyone. Instead, he launched a private initiative called Project Quiet. Its mission was simple but bold: support people in places that had been forgotten, starting with old banks, schools, libraries, and community centers. Within 48 hours, a team of engineers arrived at the old community center. They didn't wear flashy logos or film anything for social media. They just worked. Bricks were cleaned, broken glass replaced, paint buckets rolled in. Keanu visited the site each day, sometimes just to sweep the floor. Nobody recognized him at first, not the young workers, not even the foreman. On day 3, a teenage boy with dusty boots looked up at him and asked, "You the new janitor or something?" Keanu smiled. "Sort of. Just helping out. You? Don't talk much, huh?" "Talking never fixed a roof," he said with a grin. Back at the bank, Clara was placed on temporary leave. Her days felt endless. She stayed off social media, avoided the news, and barely left her apartment. But one evening, there was a knock at her door. It was an envelope. No name. Just a symbol. A small drawing of an open hand holding a heart. Inside was a ticket. A single pass to an upcoming event. Project Quiet. Community relaunch celebration. Guest of honor. Unknown. She didn't understand why it was sent to her. Was it some kind of joke? She stared at the ticket for hours, then finally made her decision. The night of the event arrived. Dozens gathered outside the newly rebuilt center. The walls now gleamed with fresh paint. New playgrounds had been installed. A kitchen inside offered free meals to anyone in need. The sign above the entrance had been restored and glowed with warm light, quiet beginnings. People whispered, trying to guess who the guest of honor was. Many thought it might be a local politician. Others hoped it was a celebrity. Nobody expected what came next. The doors opened. Children came running out first, laughing and smiling. Then behind them, a man in a plain black suit stepped forward. Keanu. No stage. No spotlight. Just a small table where he stood quietly. Clara stood near the back, heart pounding. She almost turned away, but something held her feet in place. Keanu walked to the microphone, cleared his throat, and spoke simply. Thank you for coming. This place saved me once. I was a kid with no money, no direction. And this place gave me both, so I'm giving it back. He looked around at the crowd. A few days ago, someone laughed at me for asking for $500. And maybe they had a reason. Maybe they didn't recognize me. Or maybe they forgot that kindness. Doesn't wear a uniform. A hush fell over the crowd, so I started Project Quiet, because I don't want fame to speak for me. I want action to do that. He paused, then smiled. We all make mistakes. But what we do after, that's what matters most. Then he stepped down and blended into the crowd. No guards, no cameras, just quiet. Clara stood frozen, her eyes filled with tears. She wanted to run to him, to say sorry, to say thank you, but he was gone. Or so she thought. As the event ended, she walked toward the exit, feeling both inspired and broken. Then a voice came softly from behind. I'm glad you came. She turned. It was Keanu. He held out a cup of tea. I don't drink coffee at night, he said. This one's chamomile. She took it, hands shaking. I'm sorry. I don't even know if you read my letter. I did, he said gently. And I appreciate it. I was so rude to you. He smiled. You were having a bad day. We all do. I've had mine too. But I judged you, she said, voice cracking. I thought you were just some tired old man. He chuckled. I am a tired old man. They both laughed softly. Do you want to help me with something? He asked. She looked up. What? We're building another center in San Bernardino. It's going to need a full-time team. People who've learned the hard way what kindness really means. She nodded, eyes filling with tears again. Yes, I do. That night, Clara didn't go home. She stayed and helped clean up after the event. Alongside volunteers and children, she wiped tables, stacked chairs, and shared quiet smiles. Keanu stayed too. Long after the guests had gone, he sat under a single light, staring up at the sky, not to be seen, but to feel something. The stars didn't care how rich he was. The wind didn't care how famous he was, and that made everything feel just right. The banker's lesson, the next morning, the manager of the bank sat alone in his office. He hadn't touched his coffee. Papers were scattered across his desk, reports open but unread. His name was David, and for the first time in 23 years of banking, he felt truly lost. He had worked hard for his position, rose through the ranks, believed in structure, in discipline, in treating everyone by protocol. But what had happened with Keanu Reeves shattered all of that. He hadn't seen the mistake at first, but now, with the weight of the media storm, the public outrage, and the sudden silence from headquarters, he couldn't ignore it. His branch had been selected years ago to quietly support a backup treasury for a holding company. No one told him the full details. Just that large funds were held here. Now he knew. That account belonged to Keanu. And yesterday, the bank's legal team informed him that the entire company had moved its funds elsewhere. $2 billion. Gone. Not taken. Not stolen, just moved. Quietly, peacefully, without a single threat, just like Keanu. In the hallway outside, a new atmosphere had settled over the bank. Customers walked in more carefully. Employees smiled more but said less. And Clara, though not officially back on duty, had come to visit the manager. She sat across from David holding a folder with a proposal. "I want to help rebuild the trust," she said softly. "Not just with customers, with the whole community." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not even cleared to return yet." "I know," she said, "but that doesn't stop me from trying." Inside the folder were plans for community outreach, free financial literacy classes, local business support days, a donations match program, and partnerships with schools and shelters. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. David studied the folder, in silence. Then, after a long pause, he said, "I failed too." Clara looked up. "I saw him," David said. "I saw him through the glass, and I said nothing. I let the sarcasm go on. I thought if he really was Keanu Reeves, he'd say something, but he didn't. And because he didn't act powerful, I assumed he wasn't." Clara nodded slowly. "Maybe we both forgot that power doesn't always need volume." He leaned back in his chair. "Maybe it's time I stop managing from behind." "Glass." He picked up the folder. "I'll present this to the board." Meanwhile, Keanu was on the road, not in a limo or a private jet, but in a borrowed van filled with supplies, books, blankets, water filters. Beside him sat a young woman, named Maya, a nurse who had volunteered for Project Quiet after seeing the viral photo of him at the hospital. Maya was quiet at first, unsure of what to say around him. "So," she finally asked, "why not just donate the money and be done?" Keanu glanced at her with a kind smile. "Because money fixes buildings, presence fixes people." She nodded. "But most famous people don't show up themselves." "Then maybe we need less famous people," he said softly, "and more real people." They arrived at a struggling shelter in the desert. The roof leaked, and most of the windows were boarded. But inside, a woman named Miss Elena ran things like a general. Her voice was firm, but her heart was gold. She didn't even blink when Keanu stepped out of the van. "You here to work or to pose for pictures?" she asked. Keanu grinned. "I've got gloves in my bag and sore knees. Does that qualify?" She smirked. "Grab a hammer, movie man." For the next 3 days, Keanu and Maya joined a group of volunteers rebuilding the shelter. They slept, in sleeping bags on the floor, shared meals with those in need, and never once pulled out phones. Every evening, Keanu would sit with the kids and tell quiet stories, not of movies or fame, but of his mother, of kindness, and of how listening can be louder than shouting. By the 4th day, Miss Elena took him aside. "They needed this," she said. "They needed you." "I think I needed this more," he replied. Back in the city, something unexpected was happening. A movement had begun. People from across the country were using the Taiwan Project Quiet tag, not for attention, but to share moments of silent kindness. A man in Ohio paid for groceries behind him without saying a word. A teenager in Texas returned a lost dog and left no name. A baker in New York started leaving loaves on park benches with notes that read, "For whoever needs it." In a world full of noise, something silent was spreading, and at the heart of it was one man who had once been laughed at for asking for $500. David, the bank manager, sat at his desk again. This time he wrote something with his own hands. A letter, not a memo. "Dear Mr. Reeves, I don't know if this will reach you, but if it does, please know that I have learned something far more valuable than profit margins. I learned what humility looks like, and I thank you for teaching me not through speeches or punishment, but through patience. We will do better, not because we lost your account, but because we saw what respect really looks like. David." A week later, Clara stood on the steps of the newly reopened shelter in the desert. She'd been invited by Maya, who now worked full-time with Project Quiet. Keanu was there, sitting with kids again, reading stories like always. Clara walked over slowly. "You never stop, do you?" He looked up with a grin. "Not when there's tea to drink and people to meet." She handed him a small folded piece of paper. "What's this?" he asked. "A reminder," she said, "that your silence changed more than you know." He opened it. Inside were 5 simple words handwritten in blue ink. Kindness doesn't ask for permission. He folded the note gently, placed it in his coat pocket, and nodded. That's going on the wall, he whispered. Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the hills and stars began to bloom across the sky, Keanu sat alone once more. Not out of sadness, but peace. He had made movies that made people cheer. But now, he was building something that made people feel, and that, he thought, was the real masterpiece. The Kindness Ledger. The sun rose slowly over Los Angeles, casting long shadows on the city that rarely stopped to breathe. But today felt a little different. Something quiet was growing, like the hum of hope beneath the rush of everyday life. News outlets had stopped chasing the bank scandal. There was no more gossip about whether Keanu Reeves would press charges. No lawsuits, no interviews, no angry speeches. Instead, something deeper had taken root. An idea. Kindness done quietly still echoes loudly. At the center of this quiet movement, a small notebook sat on Keanu's bedside table. It was leather-bound, worn around the edges and filled with tiny handwritten notes. He called it the Kindness Ledger. Each page was simple. Just a date, a place, and something kind he had witnessed or done. March 19th, helped an old woman carry groceries down 3 flights of stairs. She told me I reminded her of her son. He passed away 2 years ago. March 24th, saw a boy return a lost wallet. It had cash inside. He never even opened it. April 2nd, gave a man my lunch. He gave me a story in return. We both left full. The ledger wasn't meant to be seen. It wasn't for the world. It was just, for him, a way to stay grounded, to remind himself that goodness doesn't need applause. But one morning as he sat sipping tea on his porch, he decided it was time to share it. Not in a book deal or a podcast, but in action. He would create a system where everyone could have a kindness ledger. 3 days later, Keanu held a private meeting with his team. Not a corporate boardroom, but a quiet garden outside the rebuilt community center. Maya was there. Clara had flown in too. Miss Elena from the shelter joined on a video call, and a few young volunteers sat on wooden benches listening closely. We've helped rebuild, Keanu began, but what if we helped remember too? They all looked at him curiously. People forget the good they've done, he said, or they think it doesn't matter. But what if we created a way for people to track kindness the way banks track money? Maya raised an eyebrow. Like a kindness account? Yes, Keanu nodded. No rewards, no prizes, just a personal history, something they can look back on. A reminder that they're not invisible. One of the young volunteers, Sammy, spoke up. Could it be digital? Like an app? Keanu smiled. It could be anything, as long as it's real. Clara added, we could call it the Kindness Ledger, just like yours. And just like that, the idea became a plan. Within a month, developers joined the project. Designers, writers, and everyday people offered their help. The Kindness Ledger became a free app, but it didn't collect data, didn't ask for names, just a space for anyone to write down the kind things they saw or did. The app had one rule: no judgment, no followers, no likes, only reflection. And in its first week, over 100,000 entries were written. Some were small. Gave my umbrella to a stranger in the rain. Let someone cut in line. They were late to pick up their kid. Some were big. Helped build a ramp for my neighbor who uses a wheelchair. Donated half my paycheck to pay off a friend's medical bill. Keanu read through entries each night. Not to monitor, not to control, but to stay inspired. To remember why he started. One afternoon, Clara walked through the bank's front doors again. Not as a teller, but as a guest speaker. The bank, under David's leadership, had fully adopted Project Quiet into their system. They now held monthly community days, forgiveness policies for first-time overdrafts, and financial education workshops for struggling families. Clara stood in front of new trainees and shared her story, not as a victim or a villain, but as someone who had changed. I judged a man for asking for $500, she said, but that moment changed me, because he didn't punish me. He gave me a chance to become better. After the session, one young teller approached her. Do you really think people can change? Clara nodded. If they remember how it felt to be forgiven. Meanwhile, David, the bank manager, made a trip of his own. He arrived at the shelter in the desert with 2 suitcases, one full of supplies, the other filled with books. Miss Elena raised an eyebrow. What brings you here, suit and tie? He smiled awkwardly. I came to learn, and maybe sweep the floor too. She tossed him a broom. Lesson 1, don't wear shiny shoes in a dusty shelter. And just, like that David, once a man of rules and cold policy, spent a week sleeping on a cot, cleaning bathrooms and learning the names of people he once labeled as risks. On his last day, he asked Elena, why does this place feel more human than my office? She looked at him. Because here, people don't pretend they're perfect. They just try. That same week, a news station finally tracked Keanu down. Not for scandal, not for gossip, but because someone had nominated him for a Global Kindness Award. A journalist arrived at the Project Quiet headquarters with a camera crew hoping for a soundbite. Keanu stepped out with a cup of tea in hand. We just need one interview, the reporter said. Tell us what made you start all this. Keanu looked into the camera for a long time. Then he simply said, they laughed when I asked for $500, but they didn't know I once needed $500. I remember how it feels to be small, and I want the world to remember too. Because when you remember, you're kinder. The camera blinked red. Recording stopped. That was all he gave, and that was all they needed. As the kindness ledger spread across the globe, something strange began to happen. People started noticing each other again. Bus drivers were offered snacks. Teachers received handwritten thank you notes. Street sweepers were handed cold water bottles on hot days. And in the heart of it all was a man who never wanted to be famous. Only helpful. Keanu often walked through crowds unnoticed, a quiet observer in a world slowly remembering its heart. One day a child saw him sitting in a park and said, Are you the movie man? Keanu smiled. Sometimes. The child handed him a crumpled drawing. It showed a stick figure giving a flower to another. This is you, the child said. You give flowers that people can't see. Keanu folded the drawing carefully and placed it in his coat. Thank you, he whispered. I'll keep it forever. And he meant it. That night, under the soft glow of a street lamp, Keanu opened his notebook again. He wrote, Today, a child gave me a flower I couldn't see, but I felt it bloom. He closed the kindness ledger and looked up at the stars. They didn't sparkle any brighter. But somehow, the world below did. The wealth you can't spend, the early morning breeze moved gently through the trees around the old community center, now fully restored and alive with laughter. Children ran through the gardens. Volunteers painted murals. People from all walks of life sat together under the wide shade of the courtyard. What once was forgotten now breathed hope. Keanu Reeves stood quietly beside the new front gate, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He just observed, hand wrapped around a warm cup of tea, his kindness ledger tucked beneath one arm. Today marked 6 months since the day he walked into that small bank and asked for $500. 6 months since the world saw that even the most powerful hearts beat quietly. Inside the center, Clara was leading a storytelling circle with young teens. David sat nearby, helping organize books for a new library wall. Maya was tending to a small community health corner, guiding new mothers and seniors. It was no longer just a project. It had become a movement. But this part, this quiet space in Ferguson, was the final chapter. Earlier that morning, Keanu had written a letter, not to the press, not to his lawyers, to the world. He handed it to Maya, who would later share it at the upcoming summit they were organizing, a gathering of thinkers, builders, teachers, and helpers from all around the world who had joined Project Quiet. Maya opened the letter under the soft stage lights, read it out loud, word by word, her voice steady, her heart full. Dear friends, you don't know me. Not really. And maybe that's a good thing. I've made movies. I've traveled. I've spoken lines written by others. But the one line that changed me came from a stranger behind glass who laughed and asked why someone like me would need $500. She didn't know that I used to count coins with my mother in a kitchen with no heater. She didn't know I once couldn't afford a winter coat. And that's the point. She didn't know. Just like we never know what the person next to us is carrying, or fighting, or fearing. I didn't start this to be praised. I started this because I remembered. And I wanted others to remember too. Money can do a lot, but kindness does more. To those who mocked me, thank you. You reminded me how important it is to remain gentle in a world that forgets how. To those who forgave me, guided me, or simply believed in this, thank you. You gave me something money can't buy. Hope. This isn't my project anymore. It's yours. Listen to the quiet. You'll hear the truth there. Maya finished reading. Silence fell over the crowd, not because they were unsure how to respond, but because they didn't want to break the moment. Many had tears in their eyes. Others looked down at their hands, reminded of someone they had once hurt or helped. Outside, Keanu walked the streets alone. He passed shops, parks, alleys, and street corners. He wasn't checking on progress. He wasn't inspecting anything. He was saying goodbye. Not forever, but to this part of the story, his story. Back at the bank where it all began, something new had been installed beside the main entrance, a polished wooden plaque. No logos, no ads, just these words. In memory of a man who once asked for $500 and gave the world 2 billion reasons to be better. Beneath it sat a bench. People often stopped to sit there thinking, breathing, remembering. Clara sometimes visited it after her shifts. David had lunch there every Friday. One morning, a boy sat on the bench reading a well-worn comic book. Beside him was an envelope. Inside it was a $5 bill and a handwritten note. If you're ever laughed at, remember this. You are worth more than what they see. Pass it on. He didn't know who left it, but he smiled, and quietly, he tucked the bill into his pocket and whispered, I will. Months passed. Project Quiet grew into something no one could control, because it wasn't meant to be controlled. It lived in every kind act, every soft apology, every quiet gift given without a name. There were no trophies, no billion-dollar buyouts, just people remembering that silence doesn't mean weakness and that the strongest voices are the ones that echo in the heart. One night, under a sky brushed with stars, Keanu sat on the edge of a small pier by the ocean. The waves lapped softly below. He opened his ledger, now nearly full, and turned to the last page. He thought of his mother. He thought of the bank teller. He thought of the girl who gave him a flower he couldn't see. Then he wrote, I once asked for $500. They laughed. But I gave something in return. Not anger, not power, just kindness. And in the end, that was worth more than 2 billion. He closed the book. He didn't need to write more. As the ocean breathed around him and the night held him, gently Keanu Reeves smiled. Not because he had everything, but because he had given everything that mattered. Quietly, completely, and without asking for anything back.